This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, from Philadelphia to Erie and Pittsburgh to Scranton, it's Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenawalt, Senior Fellow of the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy, and I'm joined as usual by my co-host Maura Donley. Hi, Maura.
Hello, Charlie.
Well, we are very fortunate to have a guest with us today that's been
one of the best
with us before, but someone who can tell us what's going on with state infrastructure, particularly roads.
Right. He's great. Bob Latham.
Hi, nice to see you both.
Hi, Bob. Bob Latham, of course, is the Executive Vice President of the Associated Pennsylvania Constructors, and we welcome you back to the show, Bob.
Thanks. Great to be here with you both.
Well, since we've last been together, there's been a presidential election.
How about it?
And we just wondered, to sort of start the show, if you could give us your view on how does the results of that presidential election affect the highways of America, highways of Pennsylvania?
At the national level, I think what we're going to have to see is what happens in 2026, because the National Highway Program, known as the bipartisan infrastructure law, will expire and have to be reauthorized. And you may recall in 2021, when this first go-around was enacted, it was a rather large increase in funding at the federal level. It's had a tremendous impact on Pennsylvania's roads, particularly our primary system. Recently we received a $500 million grant for a major bridge project across the Susquehanna River in Harrisburg area. And that'll have a positive impact on all of Pennsylvania's roads, because that money will not have to come out of other projects. So it remains to be seen. What the administration will do. Not much talking about it on the campaign trail this go around, but I remember in 2015 and 2016, Donald Trump was a huge proponent of infrastructure in America. As a matter of fact, he was the first one I remember seeing in the primary debates that said we should have, instead of regime change in other countries, maybe we should focus on rebuilding our roads and bridges here in the state of in America. Of course, also here in Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
That bodes well for.
Yes, I think the president's a builder and a pragmatist, and I think that he's very much interested in infrastructure. The other thing that I think will be very positive is if they carry out their energy policy, which they have made a big point about, lowering energy costs. That lowers energy costs for construction, which of course lowers the cost of roads and bridges, and is good for the taxpayer of Pennsylvania and across the country. So we're very encouraged.
We've had you here a lot over the years, and it's not always a lot of great news. It hasn't always been. But the highway construction industry has had a pretty good year. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. The joke is that we're heading into one of two seasons in Pennsylvania, which is winter, and we're leaving the other season, which is road construction.
Yeah.
And we've had a lot of projects, a lot of high profile projects out there. The construction program is robust. We have about a $3 billion a year construction program, which is rebuilding our bridges and our roads primarily. Very few new projects, so this is really addressing our system. A couple of things that happened in the budget way back in June that continues to be positive for infrastructure and for taxpayers and motorists in Pennsylvania is that we have continued this policy of having the state police now being paid for. Their budget is solid. New recruits and a robust budget for the state police, but it's not coming out of the gas tax pocket, out of the infrastructure pocket, and into there.
Yes.
In fact, we come out of the budget with only $250 million coming from the highway program to the state police, which is the lowest amount it's been in many, many years. I think like 2 or 3 decades. So kudos to Governor Shapiro. When he came in, he said he was going to do this. His first year, he created the state police fund. There's an acronym that escapes me right now, but it's a specific fund for the state police. So they were fully funded at the same time. We're not robbing Peter to pay Paul anymore, and that's having a positive impact on our road construction and road rehabilitation programs.
But there was no gas tax increase. Which
No,
is
that's
even,
exactly right. We did all this.
Really
with
good.
Well, you think about it. In 2013, we passed a big increase in our gas tax. We have the second highest in the country, and our theory there is that we have low registration fees. So if you don't drive a lot, you don't pay a lot relative to other states and how they fund their roads and bridges. So, but if you drive a lot, you pay more in gas taxes because you're consuming more fuel. But you're right. We basically captured the money that was originally intended to go to roads and bridges that previously had been siphoned off for other purposes. So it was the equivalent of raising the gas tax 11 cents a gallon. Basically taking 11 cents a gallon that should have been going into roads and bridges and wasn't, but it is now.
Now it is.
And without negatively impacting safety and the state police.
Yeah.
Is it true that these changes will result here in Pennsylvania for $600 million more dollars being spent on highway construction?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a comparison to the high mark when we were taking that $600 million more than we are now out of the highway fund and putting it into the general fund. So that's basically like an increase in that on an annual basis going forward. Yeah, so it's had a huge impact. In addition to that, we finally, and we've been talking about this for years, the Commonwealth finally enacted, the governor signed legislation to impose a reasonable registration fee on all owners of all electric vehicles. Prior to that, they paid nothing, whereas if you have a gas-powered car, you're paying in the order of about $250, $260 a year. And now that's about the commensurate fee that you'll pay if you own an electric vehicle. So again, it's a user fee, it's a user charge, it's the fairest way to go about it. We became the 37th state in the country to do it, so it's not like we were leading the charge on that, but we're catching up a little bit. It's not a lot of money into the program, but it's a fairness issue, and it kind of takes away one of those items where it got a lot of talk but never got any action. So we did pass that in the spring, and then there are a couple of things that are still hanging out there that we're going to need to address.
So you've got some New Year's resolutions then. Tell us a little bit about what you expect in 2025.
Enough is never enough. We back to that major gas tax bill that we passed in 2013. We fixed 3,000 bridges along the way. We took our bridge inventory, our bad bridge inventory, from 6,000 to 3,000, and we're doing very well with that. We have captured all of the money coming to us from the federal government on that federal infrastructure bill. We're putting it to good use. There are major projects going on throughout the state, all over the state, big bridge rehabilitation projects in Pittsburgh. You've got the 83 River Bridge here in the whole 83 corridor in central Pennsylvania, as well as major improvements on I-95. They're putting a cap over I-95 that will put a park down to the waterfront in Philadelphia for Penn's Landing. And that'll be a tremendous boost to the city of Philadelphia as well as the entire Commonwealth. Yeah. It's a marquee project. So we're doing a lot of great things with the money that's coming to us. Yeah, there's always a but. There are two things that haven't been addressed. One is the situation with our public transit system. Our transit systems throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania are in need of an infusion of cash, and then on the highway side, because the way the federal bill is structured, we're spending a lot of state dollars to match those monies. So some of our rural roads and some of our rural bridges are gone wanting. Let's put it that way. So when you look at what were originally some of the old Pinchot roads that PennDOT is taking care of, there's not money for those, so we're going to have to address that in the 2025 session.
Which one of the major cities' commuting system, mass transit systems, is in worse shape or needs more attention? Pittsburgh or Philadelphia?
Philadelphia, immediately. I think that all the other systems are kind of like they're saying, well, we're about a year or two out from having financial problems, but the Philadelphia system is in bad shape financially immediately, and that was what originally spurred the discussion in 2024. They didn't get that to the finish line, and it's going to have to be addressed going forward.
As we close out our segment, there's always so much to talk about.
Sure.
One of the issues we always talk about is work zone safety, and there have definitely been some changes in the law, and it's no longer a pilot program. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
We institutionalized the automated work zone speed enforcement. So speed cameras will be there. There'll be more of them. We're encouraging motorists to slow down. I noticed as I drive around the Commonwealth through some of the major work zones, people are slowing down. That's a good thing. The idea is, and again, we always emphasize that from my standpoint, I'm worried about the workers out there,
Yeah.
but we're also worried about the motorists. And actually, the previously injuries, deaths in work zone accidents were more motorists than they were workers. So this is about motorist safety as much as it is about worker safety. So we're very pleased that that bill was reenacted.
Well, I'm happy you're working on better signage.
Right. So we're looking. Yeah, that's true.
It is. That's
that
important.
Is true. That was an important aspect of that reauthorization, I guess, if you will. And it has improved, and we're improving as well. So just a couple of things before we wrap up. We are also working on ways that we can build roads more efficiently and less costly. We're going to be rolling those out in the near term, and then also taking a look at coupling a total transportation package in 2025.
Wow.
Last question, Bob.
Yeah.
Since we're going to be spending, PennDOT is getting $175 million for charging station grants. Where are these new chargers going to be placed? What's the process that's going to be used to determine where they're being placed?
I think they're mostly in truck stops and other locations and that sort of thing. So there will be grants to private companies in order to place them.
Isn't the Turnpike putting flat charging stations?
That's experimental.
Yes, okay.
And,
that'll be
and Sweden is a leader in that technology, and the Turnpike is definitely looking at it. But there'll be charging stations in those Turnpike plazas as well.
Very good, very good. Well, thank you very much for being with us again, Bob. We appreciate it.
You bet.
And we want you to stay tuned, and we'll be back with another segment of Behind the Headlines right after this.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors, the largest, most influential municipal association in the Commonwealth. Since 1921, PSATS has been preserving and strengthening township government and securing greater visibility and involvement for townships in the state and federal political arenas. Covering 95% of Pennsylvania's land mass, townships represent 5.5 million residents, more than any other type of political subdivision in Pennsylvania. Additional underwriting provided by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org.
Today we're going to do something a little different, but something that's very, very important in the development of Pennsylvania, and that is looking at the rural parts of the Commonwealth and seeing how they may be developing and what we may expect in the future. And we're so fortunate to have with us the best person in the state in the Commonwealth to talk about this. We are very fortunate to have with us Dr. Kyle Kopko, who is the Executive Director for the Center for Rural Pennsylvania. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, thanks so much for being with us, Kyle. I think for our viewers' purposes, could you please give us a little bit of background on the Center for Rural Pennsylvania, when it was developed, why it was developed, and what it does?
Sure. The Center for Rural Pennsylvania is a legislative agency of the General Assembly. So we essentially operate as a think tank in a bipartisan manner where we serve both the House and the Senate, and we provide data and research analysis to inform the work of the General Assembly. But we also provide this information in hopes that county commissioners, municipal officials, school district directors, even nonprofit leaders in rural Pennsylvania can use information to make wise policy decisions to ensure that our rural communities are resilient going forward. So we started in 1987 at a time whenever rural and much of Pennsylvania was going through economic change. The General Assembly didn't have a lot of great data and information on which to base policy decisions specifically for rural, and that's where we came in. So we provide grants to faculty at state universities to conduct applied policy research that informs the General Assembly, and then we also maintain a comprehensive database, all different types of statistical indicators on our communities, not just in rural, but in urban communities as well, so we can engage in comparative policy analysis. The other interesting thing that the center does, we hold legislative hearings on a wide range of topics. It could be population change, which we're going to talk about today, broadband access, substance use disorder, solar development on farmland, just a whole host of different topics.
Well, you have a very interesting position. Why don't you tell us how you got there, a little bit about your background?
So my background, I'm a quantitatively trained political scientist. So I went to Elizabethtown College for undergrad, then I went to the Ohio State University for graduate school. You know, it really drives Pennsylvania policymakers nuts whenever I insert the article, but we're kind of forced to do so. And I was a political science professor at Elizabethtown and an associate dean for 10 years. And then at the end of my term, this opportunity was brought to me at the General Assembly, and I threw my hat in the ring, applied for the position, and it was really a great opportunity to work with faculty at our state university, so blending my past background in higher education, but also my research background as well, working with data and translating it in a way that is useful for a wide range of public consumers.
How exactly are you tied to the legislature? Could you talk a little bit more about your relationship with the legislature and how that works out in terms of state policy making?
Sure. All of the individuals in my office, we're all employees of the General Assembly. We're kind of an unusual arrangement. We have a board of directors that provides oversight, and it includes 4 legislators, a bipartisan group from both the House and the Senate. Our chairman is Senator Gene Yaw from Williamsport. Our vice chairman is Eddie Day Pashinsky from the Wilkes-Barre area. We also have Representative Dan Mal and Senator Judy Schwank as our other legislators. There's 2 gubernatorial appointees as well.
Let me interrupt you right there.
Sure.
How are those legislators determined?
Great question. So the officers of both the Senate and the House make those appointments. So it's up to the Speaker of the House and the President pro tem in the Senate to make those appointments.
Well, you were in the middle of a thought there about...
Sure. We also have 2 gubernatorial appointees as well. And the other 6 members of our board all come from higher ed. So we have representation from the PASHE system, the Penn State system, and regional campuses of the University of Pittsburgh system, and the president of the Northern Pennsylvania Regional College. So I really think that's a distinctive blend because it really emphasizes our research focus in trying to provide objective data to Republicans and Democrats, any political stripe, so that way communities across Pennsylvania can make informed policy decisions.
Well, speaking of data, you have a very recent study on population projections in Pennsylvania. I found it fascinating to see where we're headed. It's not necessarily in a good direction, but it's not bad. It's not bad. So why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the key findings of your new study?
Sure, and I'll back up and say, to your point, a lot of this seems like it could be dire. It could be bad news, but there's definitely some silver linings in the data. And it's really important to keep in mind that a lot of the trends that are projected out in our reports happen because of large macroeconomic trends that have been ongoing for decades. So this isn't anything that's happened overnight. It's not the result of any single policy, gubernatorial administration, federal policy, you name it. This is a larger phenomenon that affects more than just Pennsylvania.
Oh.
Okay? So what we're projecting is that by 2050, Pennsylvania's population growth will slow considerably, okay? This is across the board in Pennsylvania, although there's going to be some variations in regional population change. I'll get to that in a second. But what we're forecasting with our partners at the Pennsylvania State Data Center at Penn State Harrisburg, that the rural population in Pennsylvania will decline by about 6% by 2050, whereas the urban population will increase by about 4%. Now, just for context for listeners and viewers, we classify a rural county and a rural school district based on population density. So if you're below the average statewide density, you're classified as rural. At or above that, you're classified as urban. So if you use that definition, there's a lot of definitions out there on what is rural or suburban or urban. We just keep it simple. Rural, urban.
Well, that's where I had questions when I first looked at some of your material, because normally in this sort of analysis, don't we have the presence of suburbs, and we look at rural areas, urban areas, and suburban areas. How do you treat suburban areas then? You just must clump them all into urban.
For the most
areas.
part, statistically, that's what it ends up being. So it's a way of comparing rural versus everything else. So you would have your suburban and urban areas. So Philadelphia obviously would be considered a urban county by our definition, but also a place like Cumberland County or Lancaster County or York County would be classified as urban because their average density is above the statewide average. Whereas a place like Potter County or Perry County would be considered a rural county.
How do you justify that? Because this flies in the face of prior studies and the way that this type of subject had been analyzed. I've not been used to seeing just rural and urban.
Well, actually, the Census Bureau has had a dichotomous definition for many years, and we relied on their definition of rural and urban up through about the early 2000s. And then with some of their definitional changes, we got some odd county classifications that just didn't quite make sense, where maybe that definition worked well at the national level, but not necessarily at the state level. So we convened a focus group of academics and community stakeholders, figure out what is the most simplistic way of determining what is a rural community. And whenever you look at the data, not to say that all of rural is the same, but you see a lot of similarities in the overall data in terms of the demographics, household income, things like that. So it's our really easy way of distilling what is rural first and foremost, and really keeping the focus on rural communities.
So let's get back to your study. So you indicated that by 2050 we're going to see some changes both of rural and urban. And you did mention that we're not alone. So let's talk a little bit about, are we failing miserably like other states? Are we successful? How are we ranking?
Well, this is all relative, so let me start there. Back up, between 2010 and 2020, Pennsylvania's population overall grew at 2.4%, okay? I know I'm throwing out a lot of data, 2.4%. By our projections here with the State Data Center, by 2050, Pennsylvania's population will slow its growth rate over that 30-year period to just 1.6%. So we're seeing slower growth in the next 30 years than what we had seen in the past 10 years. Now, you're seeing similar trends in Western New York, Ohio. For example, Ohio completed their own population forecast out through 2050. The entire state of Ohio, by their measures, is supposed to decline by 6%.
Oh,
and we're going to grow by more than 1 percentage point based on these forecasts.
Okay.
We don't have great data on West Virginia at the entire state level, but the Western Interstate Commission on Higher Education typically does forecasts on the number of high school graduates in every state. This is meant to be a way for higher ed institutions to forecast enrollment trends into the future. So for West Virginia, they're projecting between 2019 and 2037, West Virginia's high school graduation population will decline by 24%. It's not that students aren't graduating, it's they don't exist. And that's what we're seeing across the board, not only in the United States, but in our region and in our Commonwealth. We're having smaller families, so our birth rate is down, and the baby boomers are comprising a larger segment of the population. And because of that, and with an aging population, fewer of those individuals are going to be in the workforce. We're going to have fewer young people behind them to take over for some of these very important roles and jobs in our community, which is why we're trying to get policymakers to understand the implications of demographic change in Pennsylvania, what it could mean for our Commonwealth going forward.
Is there an exodus going on as well? Are we seeing any sort of just migration out of Pennsylvania in addition to the birth rate and aging community?
You definitely see some movement outside of Pennsylvania, but even within Pennsylvania. So we are seeing some population shifts to the southeast, as you might imagine. And by the southeast, it's not just Philadelphia and the collar counties. We're talking about Philadelphia maybe as far west as Franklin County. So basically, if you look at I-81, I-78, that's a very rough proxy here. But if you're to the south or the east of those transportation corridors, odds are those counties and municipalities are growing historically and projected to grow also into the future. What we're also seeing, particularly in the eastern part of the state, and some of the most recent data that's been released by the Census Bureau, is an influx of individuals from the New York, New Jersey, even Philadelphia suburbs into parts of eastern Pennsylvania, into the Poconos, maybe even some migration into Pennsylvania, into places like Adams County from the Baltimore and Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. Now, what we're hearing, though, from our stakeholders on the ground and what some of the preliminary data suggests is these are later in life professionals. So it might be folks who are teleworking, or they have sufficient retirement savings where they're undertaking a new career, maybe working independently, starting up their own business, and coming to Pennsylvania for that. Don't get me wrong, that's population influx that can be good, but then there's a big question on whether or not they stay, and then what are the implications of that influx of individuals outside of Pennsylvania coming into a rural area. What does that mean for the local economy?
Okay. Well, so you've heard it here. If you have any questions about rural Pennsylvania and anything that's going on in rural Pennsylvania, the Center for Rural Pennsylvania is the place to go and look for that information and the answers. And we just started to scratch the surface of this subject and your wonderful report. And we have to ask you to come back in the very near
Happy
future.
to do it anytime.
We'd love to have you back.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors, the largest, most influential municipal association in the Commonwealth. Since 1921, PSATS has been preserving and strengthening township government and securing greater visibility and involvement for townships in the state and federal political arenas. Covering 95% of Pennsylvania's land mass, townships represent 5.5 million residents, more than any other type of political subdivision in Pennsylvania. Additional underwriting provided by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org.